Hello, hello. Today we got 15 different matchups and 15 different starts along with us. We got all these Sunday games, a couple Monday Night Football games this week, two of them. So we're going to go through each one and choose one start. This first one being Buffalo in New York. New York as in the Jets. My guy for this game is going to be Breece Hall. A lot of people drafted him as their RB2, some as their RB3, luckily. And in week one, he had a very tough matchup in Pittsburgh. A lot of people sat him. I get it. This week, I wouldn't do that. It is very similar to this Ravens offense, at least in a way of what they're trying to do and hoping to be. And we saw this Buffalo team get destroyed by the Ravens last week. I had to stop this video and redo it because when I read this stat out loud, I thought to myself, there's no way that's true. I'm being honest right now. No way that's true. I must have messed something up or typed something in wrong. I have to go back and double check and see what it actually is. That stat was they allowed 223 rushing yards on explosive carries alone. So only counting attempts that went for 10 plus yards. It sounds fake, and yet I double checked and it was true. The next closest was the Giants allowing 134, and the Bills were at 223 last week against the Ravens. And that attack with Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, that read option game, and you got Breece Hall, an explosive running back, a talented running back that did that those first 2 years, and then with Rodgers last year wasn't very good, wasn't really there, and now he's got that rushing quarterback that opens up those lanes a little bit more, and those explosive carries were back in week one, and I don't think it stops here. If Buffalo is anything similar to what they did in week one, there's going to be lots of opportunities for those big plays. And it's one of those rushing matchups where if you give Breece Hall a rushing matchup that is positive, it's really a win-win in terms of his floor because he's either getting a lot of carries against a bad rushing team, or if the Jets are in a pass-first situation, well, Breece Hall's the guy there. He's their receiving back, and even better, I would say, for fantasy in terms of when he's actually in for pass plays. We've seen it before when he was the RB2, he had over 50% of those points coming from receiving alone. So if they are throwing the bunch, well, that just also benefits Breece Hall. So the usage in week one was not really a committee usage. It was him being the starter and Braylon Allen being the backup. He had a little more important carries in there, like some of those goal line, the two-point conversion we saw Braylon Allen come in on. But overall, he had about 75% of the RB touches in week one. So he's that clear guy. He's talented, a really good rushing matchup. I like it a lot. I like it a lot. Next up, we got Jacksonville and Cincinnati. We're going to go Travis Hunter here, who ran 76% of routes in that week one, about 60% of snaps, but he was on the field when they were throwing the ball. And it didn't happen too much in the second half, by the way. So they threw the ball 19 times in the first half, 12 in the second. I'll expect against the Cincinnati offense and defense that this game is just going to be a little higher scoring, a little more back and forth, and they're going to keep throwing the ball. When he has this slot role, Cincinnati last year was 27th against slot receivers. He's playing 70% of snaps there. He had tied for the most screens in week one. The target share was number one. He had really good volume, and they were deliberately using him on passing situations. And I don't necessarily think that them saying he's going to play more defense this week means that they're going to not play him on offense as much. I think his snaps are just going to increase, and then on offense, it stays the same. That's my prediction. We look at this team last week, the Bengals against a slot receiver in Cleveland, this new defense. So it's not just going completely off of last year's, a lot of the same players, but new coaching staff. They didn't really allow anything to the slot receiver, but that's because it was basically Harold Fenton Jr. as that slot receiver, who led the team in targets, 9 targets in his first ever career game, and really good production. So I like the matchup still overall. This next one is Cleveland and Baltimore, and we're actually going to go both of the Browns tight ends. With Ingram hurt, Kittle hurt, guys that we would be starting that maybe aren't as confident of starts anymore, like Mark Andrews. I like both of these guys. And Njoku last year against his Baltimore team had 5 for 61 and a touchdown in his one game. So even without the touchdown, still, your 8.5 half PPR points, 11 PPR points, solid for a tight end in fantasy. And they both ran a lot of routes. So yes, they are both tight ends on the same team, but they aren't competing with each other as much. Fannin had 31 routes, and Njoku had 41 routes. So they are going to throw a ton. It is an 0-1 Ravens team at home. I'm guessing they're going to be winning. And I'm guessing the Browns are going to be throwing the ball a lot. I think, honestly, especially against this secondary, these are probably their top 2 targets. Over Sampson still and over Judy and Tillman. But I like these guys in a good passing volume spot and their talent. Overall, I think they're worthy of being fantasy tight ends, which you don't really need much to be starting as a fantasy tight end. Next up, we got New England and Miami, and we're going Drake Maye. Last week, in a blowout with horrible game script for a quarterback, Daniel Jones, not known for being the greatest quarterback in the world, had 272 passing yards. So not even talking about his rushing touchdowns, all that sort of stuff as fantasy day, 272 passing yards. It was 33-0, and we get to this Patriots team, and outside of the game script situation, in pass rate over the expected, they were number one in the NFL. First game with Vrabel, with Drake Maye, shocked me, but I'm happy with it. Led the NFL in dropbacks, led the NFL in passing attempts, and they're going against this Miami defense, who was average last year. They were okay, and then they lose Jalen Ramsey. And then every single person, it seems like, in their entire secondary gets hurt. And then we get the result that we saw last week. So I like Drake Maye a lot too. This next one is San Francisco versus the Saints. My start here is Ricky Pearsall. And that would seem obvious if Brock Purdy were playing. But now that Brock Purdy is not in there, it becomes more of a question mark. I still like Pearsall. In his last 3 games, he has 17.6 half PPR fantasy points per game, 22% target share. That's pretty good. Mac Jones, is he going to be able to supply enough? He played about half a season last year. In that half a season, Brian Thomas Jr. was wide receiver 1, not tight end 1. That'd be cool though. 15.7 half PPR points per game in a very similar spot where Evan Ingram was hurt, George Kittle's hurt. There isn't too much else to go there. Same thing with here in Ricky Pearsall. Mac Jones was able to do enough. We're looking at the receiving fantasy points per game for an entire team on average. The average NFL team has about 45 per game. Last year, Mac Jones had 40. So a little bit under average, but not anything that, killed you. The average San Francisco backup quarterback, since Brock Purdy came in the Shanahan system, there's been 15 games without him. 44. So it's basically the exact average. And that's what I would kind of expect. I'd expect Mac Jones to supply on average about 44 half PPR receiving points. And Pearsall being that clear number 1 target in this offense, talented, matchup is fine. I like it. Next up, we have the Giants in Dallas, and we're going to go George Pickens. So looking at last year's defense and this year's, obviously every single team changes. Last year, they were 26 against outside receivers, 5th on the inside. So I'd like George Pickens to play more in the inside. He's really good at it when they use him that way. He did in week 1, and if it stays that way for week 2, then maybe it's okay. Not as good of a matchup for, say, a CeeDee Lamb. A little bit better for George Pickens, the opposite of what it was last week when George Pickens kind of had a really good secondary, Quinyon Mitchell on him, and it didn't go as well. So I expect the volume to be a little bit better all around there. He's going to have Adebo as his outside corner, as that primary guy. Based on both of their alignments, at least in week 1, we would expect Pickens to have him over 50% of the time. And that's nothing that you're really scared of. When we're looking at the coverage in general, the Giants defense was very high in those 1 high safety looks. And that is better for those outside X receivers, those explosive plays, big plays downfield compared to 2 high looks. So Giants run a ton of it compared to that NFL average. Gives him a little bit more chance of having that big time explosive play, which is basically why we're always starting George Pickens. Or when we are starting him, that is the reason I mean. This next game, we got Chicago and Detroit. And we're going to go back to Caleb Williams. If you start him in week 1, congrats. A little ballsy, and it worked. He had double his scramble rate, which I wasn't expecting with Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, very calculated, very much not robotic to a way, but sort of with Jared Goff. And I was expecting maybe this year Caleb Williams runs a little bit less. In week 1, that wasn't the case. He had 2 times as many scrambles as he did on average last year. And last year, he wasn't the greatest quarterback. However, he was maybe the best quarterback in the NFL when he got to play the Lions, which is really interesting. He dominated them. Nearly 600 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in his 2 games against them last year. And he had week 1, 12 fantasy points from scrambling. And I bring that back up because Detroit is a very man-heavy team. They were last year. Aaron Glenn leaves. Who knows if it changes? Dan Campbell's still there, obviously. And it didn't change. They ran a ton, the most in the NFL in terms of man coverage. And when you run that amount of man coverage, well, what happens is you're turning your back to the quarterback, locking in on your receiver, And Caleb Williams, he finds that hole. No one's looking at him. He's going to take off and run. It's what happened in a lot of his scrambles last week. He had a touchdown. He had the scramble yards in general to get him to that 12 points just from rushing alone. And I think there's going to be lots of opportunity there in Detroit this week. So just based on the history there from those 2 games last year, how he looked in week 1, it was very up and down. But for fantasy, like the ups matter more because you're not getting as much of a negative on those down plays. So I like it this week. I think he's set up really well, especially for his rushing. We have Seattle versus Pittsburgh now. And I was going through all the players, and it was hard to find somebody. And I know what you guys all want me to talk about. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to say to start Kenneth Walker with not much confidence and as a flex play. So not as an RB1, but more as a flex. My reasons here is he had 13 touches on very limited plays last week, and it was in key moments of the game. It was mainly on the other side of the 50. It was in the receiving game. It was in the fourth quarter. There's lots of positives there. Maybe another week of practice and getting back from injury a little bit more. There's some hope there. It's this Pittsburgh team that is still a good defense, even after what happened with the Jets last week. But they only had 50 plays. The Jets ran it 40 times last week. So you'd expect a little bit more rushing volume overall. The receiving is there enough to give him that ceiling. He still has that touchdown upside. He's your round 4 pick. And I don't want to sit him with the ceiling that he has for a lot of other guys. So if you have another guy, I'm trying to think of a good example, but one that's like maybe projected for 10 points, has a solid floor, but they're not really going to go off for 25. Like if Kenneth Walker has, what I would compare it to is like week 1 CMC. The week before, the injury news comes out, everyone's panicking, and I'm getting like CMC started sick questions. And it's like, well, if he plays, you're still going to play CMC. And that's the reason why, as he goes out and plays and has that ceiling game. And I could see something similar happening for Walker, where a lot of this week 1 goes away and a snap of him just going out and having lots of big plays, some decent amount of catches, and a touchdown. So I would still start him, just not with as much confidence. We'll go to Denver and Indianapolis. And that's another tough one. There's a lot of Indy's defense looked good. Denver's is amazing. I'm going to go J.K. Dobbins here. I think it's one of those where I liked him and Harvey in the preseason, mainly because of the situation that they're in. I like both of their talents. They are both good running backs. But we're drafting because, well, they've got the receiving chops with Bo Nix there in that Sean Payton offense. They have a great offensive line. Who gets the touches, though? I was kind of thinking it'd be R.J. Harvey in the second half, especially in those fantasy playoffs. I still like him, but for now, after being split 50-50 to start the game yesterday, or Sunday now, J.K. Dobbins in the second half had 14 of the 17 running back touches. 14 touches in the second half. They kind of left R.J. Harvey in the dust, even besides having like that 50-yard run. Still didn't give him much work, even though that was in the second half. So Dobbins got a lot of that work. The Broncos are kind of everything the Dolphins aren't. The Colts matchup in week 1. So I don't expect it to be a similar game in that way. Miami has a bad offensive line, not the greatest rushing attack in week 1, and now they're going to play a Broncos team that's a lot different there, and a defense that is a lot better than Miami's. So do I believe in Daniel Jones yet? Not really. Do I believe that he's not going to turn the ball over and give Denver lots of scoring opportunities, specifically for their starting running back? That's why I like Dobbins. We'll go to Carolina and Arizona next. In this one, I'm guessing most people would be starting him anyways. This isn't like an insanely hot take, but I'm going to go Chuba Hubbard. The offense didn't help him out last week, but the usage was there. So last year, he had 71% of the RB touches. That's a really good amount. He obviously had really good volume overall. But Dowdle comes in, and that's where some of the worry comes. He was drafted around that RB20 range. He's good, but not like that Saquon talent where you're not really caring as much about the usage at that spot. So he's a little bit more volume dependent and offense dependent. And then Rico Dowdle comes in, and it goes from 71% of the RB touches to in week 1, 76. So everyone's kind of expecting it to like stay the same, hopefully, or go down. And it went up by 5%. It was one game, but it's a really good sign that it's not really going to go down. So he's talented. He had 17 points per game when Bryce Young returned last year. That's not a small sample size. That's half the season. He was an RB1 in fantasy. Arizona, they're not dominant on defense. It was a bad week 1 overall. He kind of got saved by that receiving touchdown, but the volume is there. I expect a little bit of a bounce back of this offense. They kind of had a lot of unlucky things happen, lots of drops, that sort of thing too. So still, Chuba Hubbard every single week is a start for me, basically. We're going to go Eagles, Kansas City next, the Super Bowl rematch. And I'm going to go DeVonta Smith. I like this spot in a bounce back game for him. The volume obviously wasn't there last week. They ran the ball a ton, but we're looking at last year and this year. A couple years ago, we'll start there actually. Trent McDuffie was a rising corner in the league, but he was playing in the slot a lot, and he was really good at it. But he was more that slot cornerback. And then last year kind of transitioned over to him being an outside guy. And now that's kind of what he's playing every single play. He's that outside corner, that star cornerback that you'd expect. Well, DeVonta Smith is playing in the slot a large majority, even more this year than he did last year. So when you have this defense in Kansas City, where week 1 we came in last week and we're like, hey, Keenan Allen and Ladd McConkey are both set up pretty well as 50%, 60% slot receivers. They get away from Duffy. They should get a lot of volume. And Keenan Allen had a ton of volume. Ladd at least had volume, not the production as much as Keenan Allen did, but still had that volume, and it worked out. And we look at last year, and it was the same last year. So it kind of stuck. Not as many changes in Kansas City. They were second best against outside receivers, 31st against slot. Just a drastic difference. The volume is just funneled in there. I think it doesn't really take too much for DeVonta Smith to capitalize. Like, we're not drafting DeVonta Smith in fantasy because he's a 150 target guy. He's a 7 target a game guy and scores a lot of touchdowns and takes advantage of being on a really good offense. So I would start DeVonta Smith with confidence in a game that should be pretty high scoring for those defenses. Atlanta and Minnesota, I struggled with this one too. This is probably the second one that I struggle with behind that Seattle game. We're going to go TJ Hockenson, partially because tight ends are horrible, and I want to give them another chance. They did not throw the ball much at all. And with Jordan Addison not playing yet, this is the time that Hockenson has to capitalize in fantasy. He had 4 targets in week 1, but it wasn't because other guys were getting targets that much. Like, Aaron Jones got some, JJ obviously got the majority, and a low passing volume day, but like Adam Thielen, who was kind of that wide receiver 2 everyone thought in Minnesota that first game, he got 1 target. Like, it's not like Hockenson is in danger of losing volume when they do happen. I would expect them to throw more. JJ McCarthy looked incredible in that 4th quarter. So hopefully that continues after those first game jitters, that sort of thing. I wouldn't start like your tight end 2, your Dallas Goederts, your Jake Fergusons, that sort of thing over him, and I wouldn't start that waiver guy like a Juwan Johnson over him. So I still like Hockenson there enough to give him that second chance. Texans and Tampa Bay. We're going to Monday Night Football, and we're going right back to the well. Emeka Egbuka. 50% slot roll in week 1. And we've talked about it a decent bit, but another scenario here where the outside corners are just really good and a little bit better than those inside guys. So here we got Derek Stingley, who's going to be primarily on Mike Evans. Similar, I don't think he'll be shadowing, but very similar to like AJ Terrell being shadowing Mike Evans last week, or in that similar spot where Mike Evans just doesn't have nearly as good of a matchup as Egbuka does when he's playing a lot more of that inside role. He didn't have a ton of targets. He had 6 last week, but obviously it is a very pass-heavy team in terms of overall volume, counting everything. Their passing attempts might not be number 1 in the NFL, but they throw in the red zone a ton. They throw downfield a ton. It is a very valuable passing attack, and it stayed that way in week 1. 6 targets turned into a lot of points, and he played 97% of snaps in his first game. So there's no worry of him like not being on the field. He played more than Mike Evans. So if anything, I would expect those targets to increase in this game in a very, very, very similar spot as week 1. And if you're giving me a spot that is very similar to a game that he scored 20 points in, sign me up. And we'll end with Omarion Hampton. A similar guy as some of these of, let's look at the usage week 1, and as a simple argument of this. I wrote at the bottom, when you have talent plus volume plus a good offense plus a bad defense, again, sign me up. Like, I don't want to look at his 8 point per game or 8 points last week in week 1, whatever it was, and be like, can't start my third round pick now. He's not good. Like, it was just a bad day against a really good rushing defense where he had first career game against that bad defense. They threw all over the field, and he had 17 touches. 17 touches in his first ever career game. And I did a stat last week how I researched like the running back's first ever career game and how they really don't touch the ball too much in their first game compared to what we'd expect. And that happened for guys like a Travion Henderson, maybe like a Caleb Johnson at all. Like lots of those guys, we were like wanting 15 to 20 touches out of this game, out of these guys, and RJ Harvey. But week 1, they're going to get 10. And that wasn't the case for Hampton. He was that clear starter. He got basically every single touch as Najee's coming back. And it's a bad defense, especially compared to Kansas City's last week. It's a good offense that we saw. He's getting the volume, and he's a first-round running back. There isn't much of an adjustment period for running backs. I would sign up on the Hampton train for week 2. I forgot the Rams and Titans, didn't I? This might be a sad one. I'm not going to start anybody on the Titans. And all the Rams guys are, pretty obvious. We're going to go the Rams defense. Nobody pressured the quarterback more than the Denver Broncos last week, playing against this Titans offensive line. Cam Ward took 6 sacks. He's obviously going to be a little more turnover prone than the average quarterback because he's not only aggressive, but he's playing his second career game. He's going against this defensive line that pressured Stroud a lot last week and is just really good. Like, we know the Rams defensive line is legit. So we're getting this team that put up double-digit fantasy points last week as more of that streaming defense. I'd expect the same exact thing in week 2. Thank you guys for watching. We'll have these weekly, so hopefully come back, watch some more. Hopefully these starts hit too. Good luck this week.